The screen flickers to life, revealing the grainy, silent footage of a black and white security camera. The digital clock in the bottom corner blinks relentlessly, marking exactly 3:14 in the morning. The setting is the cold, deserted corridor of a pediatric oncology ward, a bleak battleground where hope wages exhausting, desperate wars against absolute despair. Suddenly, the heavy automatic doors slide open, breaking the sterile stillness. The figure stepping through the threshold does not wear a pristine white lab coat or a tailored public relations suit. It is a tall man with broad, unyielding shoulders, clad in a weathered leather jacket that carries the invisible dust of countless miles, faded denim jeans, and an unmistakable well-worn Stetson hat pulled low over his eyes. In his right hand, he grips the handle of a battered vintage guitar case. The visual shock is immediate and chilling. It is the king of country, a living legend who commands the roaring devotion of gigantic stadiums, walking entirely alone, in absolute and profound secrecy, down the saddest and most vulnerable hallway in the world. There are no flashing cameras, no entourage of assistants, no bodyguards to clear his path. There is only a man whose features have been hardened by time and Texas wind, swallowing hard as he prepares to face a kind of agonizing pain that no amount of wealth or fame can ever cure. The atmosphere radiates a crushing emotional weight, promising a revelation of true greatness that only emerges when absolutely no one is watching. The environment inside the Houston Children's Hospital is suffocatingly oppressive. By daylight, it stands as a towering marvel of modern medicine, a beacon of scientific triumph. But in the dead of night, the reality shifts. The harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights cast long, sickly shadows against the pale linoleum floors. The relentless, rhythmic beeping of heart monitors echoes down the corridors, creating a haunting symphony of fragile survival. In the waiting areas, exhausted parents are slumped in impossibly uncomfortable plastic chairs, their faces pale and etched with the dry, cracked trails of endless tears. The air smells sharply of antiseptic, masking the heavy, unspoken grief that hangs in every corner. It is into this arena of extreme human vulnerability that George Strait steps, bringing with him the faint, grounding scent of a sudden Texas rainstorm and old saddle leather. He had driven for hours through the pitch-black night, his old reliable pickup truck cutting through the desolate highways. He deliberately parked far away from the illuminated main entrance, avoiding the security guards and the valet stands, choosing instead the shadows of the overflow lot. His mood is incredibly somber, his jaw set with a quiet, fierce determination. He is not here on a publicity tour. He is here for Leo. Leo is an 8-year-old boy, the only son of an honest, hard-working horse handler who had worked on the ranches of George's youth. That humble family had poured every single cent they had, sold their modest home, and exhausted every ounce of their life savings to fight the terminal shadow creeping through their little boy's veins. George, guided by an unshakable moral code and a deep-rooted Christian faith that demands action over empty words, had made a quiet promise to be there. The initial clash of two entirely different worlds begins at the pristine, high-tech reception desk of the intensive care unit. Dr. Harrison, the night shift director, stands behind the counter. Harrison is a meticulously groomed, highly stressed administrator in an impeccable, sharp suit. He is a man who views the hospital not as a sanctuary of healing, but as a rigid corporation driven by risk management protocols, liability clauses, and the appeasement of billionaire donors. Harrison glances up from his tablet, and his eyes immediately narrow. He takes in the sight of the dust on the man's boots, the frayed edges of the leather jacket, the old guitar case, and the Stetson hat. In a fraction of a second, Harrison's cynical mind categorizes this imposing figure as a disruptive, out-of-place country hick who has wandered into the wrong building. George approaches the desk with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who knows the value of respect. He removes his hat, holding it against his chest, revealing eyes that hold a deep, sorrowful wisdom. "Excuse me, sir," George says, his voice a low, steady rumble that carries the polite warmth of a true Texan. "I came to see the boy in room 412. Dr. Harrison does not even offer the courtesy of a sympathetic smile. His response is sharp, swift, and dripping with corporate ice. Visiting hours concluded hours ago, Harrison snaps, adjusting his expensive glasses. This is a highly restricted intensive care unit. Ordinary people cannot simply walk in here and break security protocols because they feel like it. We have rules. I suggest you leave before I am forced to call security. Harrison treats the quiet legend standing before him with a cold, dismissing condescension, the exact type of arrogance reserved for those who look down upon the working man, entirely blind to the towering giant of country music standing right in front of him. George does not raise his voice. He does not puff out his chest. He does not utter the arrogant phrase asking if the doctor knows who he is. He simply absorbs the harshness of the administrator's words. He gives a slow, respectful nod, gently touches the brim of his hat and steps back. He willingly accepts this silent humiliation, choosing to swallow his pride for the sake of preserving the fragile peace of the hospital ward. He will not cause a scene where children are fighting for their lives. The tension thickens as George retreats to the dimly lit general waiting room down the hall. He sits heavily on a rigid plastic chair, placing the old guitar case carefully at his feet. From the shadows, he observes the raw, unfiltered agony of the world around him. Across the room, standing near a flickering, broken vending machine, is a father. The man's clothes are wrinkled, his shoulders are shaking violently, and he is weeping compulsively into his rough hands, entirely broken by the weight of his child's illness. George watches him for a moment, his heart breaking in silent solidarity. Slowly, the king of country rises to his feet. He walks over to the terrible automated coffee machine, inserts a few coins, and brews a bitter, steaming cup of dark liquid. He approaches the weeping father, and without saying a single intrusive word, gently extends his hand, offering the warm cup. The father looks up, his eyes bloodshot and confused, and takes the coffee. George offers a firm, deeply grounding handshake. It is a simple gesture, yet it transmits absolute mountains of empathy, a silent communication between two men that says, "You are not alone in this dark valley." Dr. Harrison, marching briskly down the corridor with a stack of medical charts, catches sight of this quiet exchange. Instead of seeing compassion, Harrison only sees defiance. He bristles with irritation at the presence of this stubborn cowboy who refuses to obey orders and vacate the premises. Harrison makes a mental note to have the guards physically remove the man if he lingers for another 10 minutes. But the quiet stillness of the night is suddenly and violently shattered. A piercing, frantic alarm erupts from down the hall. The flashing red lights above room 412 begin to spin. It is Leo's room. The sound is terrifying, a mechanical scream signaling that a fragile life is slipping away. A team of doctors and nurses sprint past the waiting room, their faces pale with urgency, pushing crash carts and shouting medical codes. George is on his feet in an instant, his heart pounding against his ribs. He rushes down the hallway, stopping just short of the open door. He is pressed against the cold glass wall of the corridor, watching helplessly as the medical team fights a desperate, chaotic battle to stabilize the tiny, fragile boy thrashing on the bed. The contrast is absolutely tearing at the soul. The man who can control the emotions of 80,000 cheering fans with a single masterful chord of his guitar is standing there, completely paralyzed, reduced to an utterly impotent spectator in the face of life's cruelest fragility. He cannot sing away the failing heartbeat. He cannot buy another breath for the boy. Dr. Harrison suddenly appears beside him, his face flushed with anger and stress. Harrison shoves his finger aggressively toward the exit. "This is exactly why you cannot be here," Harrison hisses harshly, his voice cutting through the panic. "This is no place for you. You are in the way. Get out of this hospital right now, or I swear I will have the police drag you out in handcuffs." George's weathered face contorts in a masterfully contained agony, his jaw clenching so hard it looks as though it might shatter. His eyes locked on the chaotic scene inside the room as the alarms continue their deafening, merciless scream. Right at this moment of extreme, suffocating tension, where a beloved legend is standing on the precipice of being thrown out into the cold street during the most critical, agonizing moment of a child's life, we must pause. If you are moved by this story of hidden strength and want to witness exactly how true nobility and quiet grace respond to absolute cruelty and blinding pain, please subscribe to the channel right now Your support allows us to continue sharing these profound journeys of faith and redemption. The chaotic, terrifying screech of the medical alarms inside room 412 begins to shift, slowly descending from a frantic, erratic panic into a trembling, fragile rhythm. Through the cold glass wall of the corridor, the exhausted medical team can be seen stepping back from the tiny bed, wiping heavy beads of sweat from their foreheads. The immediate catastrophic crisis has been temporarily averted, but the dark, suffocating shadow of death remains heavily draped over the sterile room. Outside in the hallway, George Strait remains absolutely frozen. His large, calloused hands grip the worn leather handle of his battered guitar case with such immense crushing force that his knuckles are stark white against his weathered, sun-baked skin. He is a man who has ridden wild, unbroken horses, weathered brutal Texas storms, and stood with quiet command before millions of roaring fans. Yet in this brightly lit, merciless hospital corridor, he is entirely stripped of his worldly power. He closes his eyes for a fraction of a second, his lips moving in a silent, desperate prayer to the Almighty, asking for a blanket of grace to fall over the fragile life of the little boy lying just beyond the glass. Dr. Harrison does not care about silent prayers or quiet moments of faith. He only sees a liability, a disruption to his perfectly managed corporate environment. The administrator steps closer to George, aggressively invading his space. Harrison's expensive, sharp cologne clashes violently with the honest, grounded scent of worn saddle leather, old wood, and rain-swept Texas dust that clings to George's jacket. Harrison points a perfectly manicured, trembling finger toward the heavy double doors at the far end of the hall. "I told you to leave," Harrison says, his voice a harsh, venomous whisper designed to cut deep into the bone. "You have absolutely no business being here. Look at you. You are upsetting the environment. These are highly sensitive, critical medical situations, not some dusty county fair where you can just wander in off the dirt road and pretend you belong. If you do not turn around and walk out of this hospital right this very second, I will have the security guards physically drag you out, and I will personally press charges for trespassing." George slowly opens his eyes. He looks down at the furious administrator. There is no anger in his steady gaze, no ego rising to defend his legendary name. There is only a profound, oceanic sorrow. He understands, with the deep wisdom of a man who has lived a full life, that this doctor is completely blinded by his own arrogance, trapped in a cold world of spreadsheets and sterile protocols, entirely disconnected from the raw, beating heart of human suffering. George takes a slow, deep breath, his broad chest rising and falling beneath his jacket. He prepares to turn away. He prepares to walk out into the cold, desolate night, not because he is intimidated by the threat of police, but because his deep-seated humility and his absolute respect for the dying children dictate that he must not be the cause of any further disturbance. He touches the brim of his Stetson, a gesture of tragic, quiet defeat, and takes one heavy step backward, the heel of his cowboy boot clicking softly against the linoleum. But before his boot can fully settle on the floor, the heavy wooden door of room 412 clicks open. The sound is sharp, cutting through the tense, heavy air like a gunshot. Out steps head nurse Martha. She is a woman in her late 60s, her shoulders slightly stooped from decades of carrying the unimaginable, crushing grief of losing the children she has cared for. Her blue scrubs are wrinkled, her face deeply lined with a bone-deep exhaustion, but her eyes retain a fierce, untamed kindness that no amount of tragedy could ever extinguish. She pulls the stethoscope from her ears, letting it hang loosely around her neck. She smells of harsh rubbing alcohol, strong black coffee, and the unique heavy weariness that only veteran night shift nurses truly understand. Martha pauses in the doorway, taking a deep breath of the sterile air. She looks at Dr. Harrison, her expression instantly hardening with the fierce, protective instinct of a mother bear defending her sacred territory. Then, her tired eyes shift to the tall, broad-shouldered man standing quietly in the shadows of the hallway. She sees the worn leather jacket. She sees the dusty boots. She sees the old, battered guitar case. And then, as the fluorescent light catches his features, she looks directly at his face. She sees the hardened, stoic jawline, the quiet dignity, the unmistakable, towering presence of a true Texas legend. Martha freezes completely. The plastic medical chart in her hand slips from her grasp, hitting the floor with a soft, echoing thud. She does not see a wealthy celebrity. She sees the voice that carried her through the absolute darkest years of her own life. She remembers sitting on a crumbling wooden porch in West Texas decades ago, the wind howling across the plains, her father struggling to keep their family farm alive, and the radio playing a voice so pure, so honest, and so true that it made the unbearable weight of their poverty seem somehow manageable. "Mr. Strait," Martha whispers, her voice trembling violently, thick with a sudden rush of emotion she cannot possibly suppress. The name hangs in the air, suspending time itself. Dr. Harrison blinks, his face contorting in utter bewildered confusion. He looks from the exhausted, weeping nurse to the quiet cowboy. He opens his mouth to speak, to harshly reprimand Martha for addressing a trespasser, but the words die entirely in his throat. Martha steps forward, completely and utterly ignoring the hospital administrator. She walks right past Harrison as if he were nothing more than a ghost in the hallway. She stops directly in front of George, her hands shaking slightly as she reaches out, as if she needs to confirm that he is actually real and not a phantom born of her own exhaustion. "You came," she says, heavy tears rapidly welling in her eyes and spilling over her eyelashes. "You actually came." George offers a gentle, heartbreakingly humble smile. He tips his hat to her, a gesture of profound respect for the woman who fights on the front lines of grief. "I gave my word, Mum," he replies, his voice a low, soothing rumble that instantly changes the atmospheric pressure of the entire hallway, bringing a sudden grounding warmth to the sterile cold. "I told Leo's daddy I would be here tonight. I apologize if I caused any trouble for you or your staff. I was just about to leave." "Leave?" Martha repeats, her voice suddenly finding a core of absolute, unbreakable steel. "Over my dead body." She turns slowly, deliberately, to face Dr. Harrison. The administrator is now entirely pale, all the blood draining from his face as the colossal, catastrophic magnitude of his mistake begins to crush him like a physical weight. He suddenly realizes, with a sickening drop in his stomach, that he has just spent the last hour berating, humiliating, and threatening to arrest one of the most respected, beloved, and powerful figures in American history. A man whose quiet, anonymous philanthropy is legendary across the state. A man who could likely fund the entire hospital wing with a single quiet phone call. "Dr. Harrison," Martha says, her voice echoing down the corridor with undeniable, fierce authority. "This man is our guest. He is exactly what this ward needs tonight. If you want to call security and have him removed, you go right ahead. But you will have to fire me and drag me out right alongside him." Harrison is completely paralyzed. The rigid corporate armor he wears so proudly is shattered into a million pieces by the sheer, unadulterated humanity of the moment. He stammers, taking a weak step back, his eyes wide with a sickening mixture of shock and profound shame. He cannot even bring himself to look George in the eye. He turns on his polished leather heels and practically flees down the corridor, his arrogant stride replaced by a frantic escape, seeking refuge in the only place he feels safe from his own embarrassment. He retreats to the cold, detached environment of the basement security control room. Martha turns back to George, her expression softening into a look of desperate gratitude. She looks down at the weathered guitar case in his hand. "We have had a terrible, terrible night, Mr. Strait," she whispers, a tear finally escaping and tracing a long path down her cheek. "There is so much pain in these rooms. The medicine, the machines, they can only do so much. The souls of these families are breaking. Will you walk with me?" George nods slowly. He does not say another word. He simply follows Martha toward the heavy double doors of the intensive care unit. As he crosses the threshold into the ward, he reaches up and slowly removes his Stetson hat, holding it firmly against his chest over his heart in a gesture of absolute reverence. He knows he is entering sacred ground. The air inside the ICU is heavier, thicker, with unspoken prayers. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors is a constant, terrifying reminder of the fragile line between life and death. Down in the concrete basement, inside the dimly lit security control room, Dr. Harrison stands trembling behind a row of glowing monitors. Two night shift security guards sit in their swivel chairs, their mouths hanging wide open in absolute disbelief as they watch the black and white camera feeds. Through the grainy, silent cameras, they are about to witness a scene that will forever alter the trajectory of their lives and redefine everything they know about power and grace. There is no audio feed. They cannot hear a single note being played or a single word being spoken. But the visual impact unfolding on the screens is devastatingly powerful. They watch on screen number 4 as George Strait, the undisputed king of country, walks slowly into the room of a teenage girl who's been trapped in a medically induced coma for weeks. Her parents are slumped in plastic chairs in the corner of the room, completely broken, hollowed out by the relentless agony of waiting. George does not wake them. He moves with the quiet grace of a shadow. He pulls up a small, uncomfortable plastic stool right next to the girl's bed. He sits down, his large frame looking entirely out of place in the clinical high-tech setting. He gently lays the old guitar case on his lap. The security cameras capture the precise, deliberate moment he undoes the brass latches. He opens the lid and lifts out the worn, beautiful acoustic guitar. His calloused fingers, hands that have worked the rough Texas earth and built wooden fences, settle gently over the strings. He begins to play. In the security room, Harrison watches the vital sign monitors mirrored on his secondary computer screen. As the silent music fills the hospital room upstairs, something scientifically inexplicable begins to occur right before his eyes. The erratic, stressed spikes of the teenage girl's heart rate, jagged and panicked on the monitor, begin to smooth out. The sharp lines transform into a steady, calm, peaceful rhythm. The girl's mother, asleep in the chair, stirs slightly, her exhausted face relaxing for the first time in a month, subconsciously enveloped by the deep, resonant, healing baritone of the man singing in the shadows. George finishes the unseen song, bows his head in a silent, deep prayer over the bed, carefully places the guitar back in its case, and moves silently to the next room. The silent walk continues. He walks down the corridor, a solitary figure of immense, quiet majesty. He enters room after room, carrying the weight of their sorrow on his shoulders. He sits with a young boy, wrapped entirely in white bandages, playing a soft, rhythmic melody that brings a weak, beautiful, trembling smile to the child's cracked lips. He sits with a mother who is weeping silently in the dark corner of her infant's room, entirely consumed by despair, and he simply plays a melody so profound, so full of grace, that the mother falls to her knees, burying her face in her hands, finally finding a release for her suffocating agony. The security cameras record every single heartbreaking moment. The grainy black and white footage captures the absolute essence of true nobility. It is not a performance for the cameras. There is no applause waiting for him at the end of the song. There are no flashing lights, no reporters, no fame to be gained. It is simply a man using his God-given gift to pour cool water on the burning, desperate souls of the afflicted. In the security room, the silence is entirely deafening. Dr. Harrison, the man who worshipped rigid protocols and openly despised the working-class cowboy, feels his knees buckle beneath him. He reaches out, gripping the cold metal edge of the control console so hard his knuckles ache, desperately trying to keep from collapsing to the floor. Tears, hot, bitter, and completely uncontrollable, begin to stream down his face, ruining his perfect, untouchable demeanor. He is watching a masterclass in empathy. He is watching a man who possesses the wealth of a king, a man who could be sleeping in a mansion, choosing instead to spend the absolute darkest hours of the night kneeling on cold linoleum floors, offering his heart to strangers who have nothing to give him in return. Harrison realizes, with a crushing, suffocating weight of guilt, how incredibly small, petty, and insignificant his own arrogance has been. George steps inside room 412, and the heavy, solid oak door closes softly behind him, sealing out the harsh, mechanical noises of the corridor. The atmosphere in this room is completely different from the rest of the ward. It is suffocatingly dense, thick with the smell of strong antiseptics and the metallic tang of fear. The only illumination comes from the glowing, erratic screens of the life support machines and the faint, pale moonlight filtering through a half-drawn blind. In the center of the room, engulfed by a sterile white bed that seems entirely too large for him, lies little Leo. The boy is pale, his skin almost translucent, his dark hair thinned from the relentless, brutal chemotherapy treatments. His chest rises and falls in shallow, labored, terrifyingly weak breaths. Slumped in a hard plastic chair beside the bed is Leo's father, a man whose hands are deeply scarred from years of working wild horses and mending barbed wire fences on the sun-baked plains of Texas. The man is completely broken. His shoulders are shaking uncontrollably, his face buried deep in his calloused hands, weeping with the silent, desperate agony of a father who knows he is losing his only son. He has sold everything he owns, worked himself to the bone and prayed until his voice gave out, but the cruel reality of the disease is relentlessly advancing. George does not announce his presence. He does not clear his throat or offer hollow, empty platitudes about how everything is going to be all right. He knows, with the deep, sorrowful wisdom of a man who has lived through his own profound tragedies, that in moments of absolute darkness, words are often meaningless. He moves with the slow, deliberate grace of a shadow, his boots making no sound on the linoleum floor. He gently places his weathered guitar case on the foot of the bed and slowly unclasps the brass latches. He lifts the old, beautiful acoustic guitar, the wood worn smooth by decades of playing, and holds it gently against his chest. Leo's father slowly lifts his head, his eyes bloodshot and swollen, expecting to see another doctor with a clipboard full of bad news. When his gaze lands on the tall, broad-shouldered figure standing in the dim light, his breath hitches violently in his throat. He recognizes the worn leather jacket. He recognizes the Stetson hat. He recognizes the face of the man he has idolized his entire life, the man whose music played from the dusty radio of his pickup truck every single morning before sunrise. The father tries to stand, his legs trembling weakly, but George immediately raises a hand, a gentle, silent command to stay seated. George pulls up a small stool and sits down right next to the bed, leaning in close to the fragile boy. Leo stirs slightly, his heavy eyelids fluttering open. He looks up, his vision blurry, and sees the king of country sitting beside him. A weak, trembling smile, beautiful and heartbreaking, slowly spreads across the boy's pale lips. He recognizes the man from the posters on his bedroom wall back home, the man his father always talked about with such deep reverence. "Hey there, cowboy," George whispers, his voice a low, incredibly soothing rumble that instantly changes the atmospheric pressure of the entire room, bringing a sudden, grounding warmth to the sterile cold. "I hear you've been fighting a mighty tough battle in here. I figured I ought to come down and see how my favorite ranch hand is doing." Leo tries to speak, but his voice is nothing more than a raspy, exhausted whisper. "I am tired, Mr. Strait," the boy says, a single tear escaping the corner of his eye and rolling down his pale cheek. "I am so tired of fighting." George feels a massive, crushing weight settle squarely on his chest. He swallows hard, fighting back the intense wave of emotion that threatens to break his stoic composure. He reaches out with his large, calloused hand and gently, incredibly softly, takes Leo's small, fragile hand in his own. "You are the bravest cowboy I have ever known, Leo," George says, his voice thick with a raw, unfiltered sincerity. "And sometimes, even the bravest cowboys need a little rest. But you listen to me now. You are not fighting this alone. You have your daddy right here, and you have a whole army of angels watching over you tonight." George adjusts the guitar on his lap, his fingers finding the familiar, comforting shapes of the chords. He does not play a loud, roaring stadium anthem. He does not play a fast-paced, foot-stomping hit. He closes his eyes, takes a deep breath, and begins to play a slow, acoustic, deeply spiritual hymn. The melody is incredibly pure, stripped of all commercial production, raw and honest. It is a prayer in the form of music. His rich, resonant baritone fills the small room, wrapping around the terrified father and the dying boy like a warm, protective blanket against the freezing cold of their reality. Out in the hallway, Dr. Harrison has slowly walked back from the basement security room. He stands frozen just outside the glass wall of room 412. He is entirely stripped of his arrogant corporate armor. His expensive suit feels like a straitjacket. He watches the scene unfolding inside the room, tears streaming freely down his face, completely unashamed of his weeping. He watches the erratic, panicked spikes on Leo's heart monitor slowly begin to smooth out, transforming into a steady, calm, peaceful rhythm as the music washes over the boy. He watches the exhausted father lean his head back against the wall, closing his eyes, finally finding a momentary release from his suffocating agony. Harrison realizes, with a profound, earth-shattering clarity, that he is witnessing a miracle. Not a medical miracle born of science and protocols, but a miracle of the human spirit, a testament to the staggering power of empathy and grace. George finishes the song, letting the final, beautiful chord ring out until it slowly fades into absolute silence. He carefully places the guitar back in its case. He looks down at Leo, whose breathing has become significantly deeper and more relaxed, a peaceful expression finally settling over his tired features. George reaches down to his waist. He unbuckles his belt and slowly slides off the massive, solid silver buckle. It is a legendary piece, intricately engraved, won decades ago at a grueling, dangerous rodeo long before he was famous. It is a symbol of immense grit, survival, and hard-fought victory. George leans over the bed and gently places the heavy silver buckle right into Leo's small, fragile hands. He closes the boy's fingers around the cool metal. "For the bravest cowboy I have ever known," George whispers softly, a single tear finally escaping his eye and tracing a line down his weathered cheek. "You hold on to this, Leo. You hold on tight. It carries a lot of miles and a lot of strength. I want you to have it." Leo's father suddenly drops to his knees beside the bed, completely overwhelmed by the staggering magnitude of the gesture. He buries his face in the mattress, weeping openly, his shoulders shaking with a profound, desperate gratitude. "Thank you," the father sobs, his voice breaking violently. "Thank you, Mr. Strait. You have no idea what this means to us. You have no idea." George reaches out and places a firm, grounding hand on the father's shaking shoulder. He gives it a reassuring squeeze, a silent communication between two men that says, "You are not alone in this dark valley. You keep the faith, brother," George says quietly. "You keep holding the line." With that, George slowly stands up. He picks up his battered guitar case, gives one final, deeply respectful nod to the father, and turns toward the door. As he steps out into the hallway, Dr. Harrison is standing there, his head bowed, his hands trembling at his sides. The administrator cannot even bring himself to look the legend in the eye. He is absolutely humiliated by his own previous coldness, completely broken down by the sheer majesty of a man who uses his immense greatness not to elevate himself, but to serve the absolute lowest and most vulnerable. George does not gloat. He does not demand an apology. He simply stops for a fraction of a second, looks at the weeping doctor, and gives a slow, incredibly gentle tip of his Stetson hat. It is a gesture of absolute forgiveness, a silent acknowledgement that we all have the capacity to learn and grow from our darkest moments. Then, without a single word, George Strait turns and walks slowly down the long, sterile corridor, his boots clicking softly against the linoleum, a solitary figure disappearing into the shadows of the hospital. The next morning, brilliant warm rays of Texas sunlight flood through the large windows of the Houston Children's Hospital, casting long golden shadows across the pristine floors. The night shift is over, and the frantic energy of the day begins. But George Strait is long gone. He slipped out the back door hours ago, long before the sun crested the horizon. He did not sign a single autograph. He did not allow the hospital's aggressive public relations team to take a single photograph. He simply vanished back into the vast, dusty expanse of the state he loves. However, in the small, brightly lit music therapy room on the second floor, the staff discovers something extraordinary. Resting gently on a stand in the corner of the room is George's old beautiful acoustic guitar. Tucked beneath the strings is a simple handwritten note on plain white paper. The note contains no boastful signature, only a quiet guarantee arranged through his private foundation, ensuring the full, unrestricted financial funding of the entire pediatric oncology ward for the next 10 consecutive years. The enormous, crushing burden of medical debt for families like Leo's has been completely erased by a single anonymous stroke of a pen. A flash forward instantly transports us 15 years into the future. The scene opens on a vast, sun-drenched ranch deep in the heart of the rugged Texas hill country. The sky is an endless, piercing blue, and the air smells strongly of dry dust, sweet hay, and blooming wildflowers. A young, incredibly strong and perfectly healthy man is working inside a wooden round pen, expertly breaking a wild, spirited Mustang. His movements are fluid, confident and powerful. As he turns to grab a lead rope, the bright, blinding Texas sun catches a flash of metal at his waist. There, shining brilliantly against his worn denim jeans, is a massive, incredibly intricate, solid, silver rodeo buckle. It is Leo. He is alive. He is thriving. He is a testament to the enduring power of hope and the absolute resilience of the human spirit. He wipes the sweat from his brow, pats the massive neck of the horse, and looks out across the rolling plains, a deep, knowing smile playing on his lips, carrying the quiet strength of a man who has looked death in the eye and survived. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, deep inside the sterile, bustling corridors of the Houston Children's Hospital, a new generation of nurses is gathered in the break room during the quiet hours of the night shift. An older, gray-haired nurse, who was just a trainee all those years ago, sits at the table, pouring a cup of bitter black coffee. She leans in close to the younger staff members, her voice dropping to a reverent, hushed whisper. She begins to tell them the incredible, enduring legend of the Night of the Cowboy. She tells them the story of the dark, terrifying early morning hours when the undisputed king of country walked through those very doors, entirely alone and in absolute secret, to prove to a desperate, broken ward that miracles, profound and quiet, absolutely still exist in this world.